Welcome back everybody to another Motobob Vlogs. We're out on the press launch for the Honda Transalp XL750, and unfortunately we don't have what you might expect for typical Portuguese weather. A little bit wet, but I suppose it's decent real world-ish riding conditions. So we're going to take in a bit of road riding, a little bit of off-road hopefully. I believe it's about 10 minutes away. And what I want to answer in this video while we're along for the ride is whether this bike is almost as good as an Africa Twin. It's a question that's come up a lot in the comments of videos about this bike, you know, prior to this trip. Hang on, what's going on? And you can easily see why. I mean, it does have a little bit of that baby Africa Twin vibe. Some of the looks, some of the branding, I suppose, you know, with both being a historical Honda model and also the engine's not a million miles away, is it? A parallel twin with a 270-degree crank. And so yeah, you can see why it looks like a tempting replacement, especially given the price point. So you're still looking at about 13 grand, maybe a little bit more for the Africa Twin base model. Whereas this bike, at launch anyway, is coming in at 9,499, so 9.5 grand. And I think that's really impressive and makes it a very tempting proposition. So let's have a think about some of the reasons that you might want to go for this, and then perhaps we'll explore the strengths of the Africa Twin as well. And at the end, I'll tell you which one I would personally go for. Now, certainly that price point is pretty impressive. And I think when you look at the engine as well that you're getting for that money, it really is very good. I mean, I first rode it on the Hornet launch last year, and it's pretty much the same in this bike. So like I say, parallel twin, 270 crank, 755 cc's. They've changed a little bit about it, so some minor stuff like the air intake ducts are longer. They've tried to emphasize the torquiness of the engine, but looking at the headline figures, peak torque, I think it's 75 newton meters, and it's quite high in the rev range. And then also peak power is like 90.5 horsepower at 9,500. They're really very similar. You can see a slight difference, like 0.2 of a horsepower or 250 RPM, but you know, those big numbers look pretty much the same, and it really does feel quite similar. And what you get is, versus the competition anyway, something that revs out quite nicely. I mean, this is third look all the way up to 9.5, quick shifter into fourth, and yeah, if you get down into second like this, slower corners like this, it really does feel lively on the exit. And I think the Africa Twin comes in the 1100 at either 100 horsepower or 105, and so it might not sound like a huge difference, you know, 10 horsepower or so, and I think it probably kind of feels like that on the road. If you're revving it, the Africa Twin doesn't have a great deal of top end, and so this can almost compete with it, especially when you consider that its curb weight is 208 kilograms, which is super impressive. So nice and light versus the competition, much lighter than the Suzuki V-Strom 800DE, which was launched for this year as well, a direct competitor, similar-ish in price, a little more expensive, similar in the engine, another parallel twin, a little down on power though, but this one comes in a good 10 or 20 kilos lighter, and it feels sprightly. And so I think that leads me on to, you know, another good reason to consider this bike over the Africa Twin, and that's just the slightly reduced stature, which might make it a little more accessible to less confident riders or people who don't want a massive bike. Not that the you know, the Africa Twin's not quite GS Adventure or Tiger 1200 territory, but it is substantial. And whilst this still feels like a fully fledged adventure bike, it's not little like a CB500X. It's still that little bit easier in weight and also height to just get along with day in, day out than an Africa Twin. I mean, last year I was lucky enough to do the Honda Adventure Experience down in Devon, I believe. Really good. Thoroughly enjoyed it, thoroughly recommended. And it really allowed us to kind of see what the Africa Twin can do off-road. Even the DCT model I was very impressed with. But I will say there was a couple of people that were perhaps a little green to off-roading, and whilst most people found a group that they were happy with, I do remember two riders who were a little bit shorter and they just found it a bit of a struggle. Now I believe they are getting Transalps on the adventure experience this year, which I think is really interesting. Hopefully it will open it up to anybody who feels more confident on a, you know, a slightly smaller bike. It's still 850mm in the seat height, so it's not what you call, oh my goodness, cannot see a thing. It's not what you call little, but, you know, clearly it's going to be slightly preferable to the shorter rider. Now, I will also say, the other thing that has impressed me on both this bike and the Hornet, because it's kind of common to the two of them, is the tech package that you get in at, you know, $6,999 for the Hornet, $9,499 for this bike. And yeah, it's probably one of the best or most complete tech packages in that kind of market sector, beating even bikes that are quite a bit more expensive. So the Tenere 700 comes to mind. A brilliant bike, really great chassis design, proven engine, but it's a simplistic machine. That might be good for some people if you want something that you think is perhaps more easily fixable. I don't know if that really is the case, but certainly I've seen in my comments that there's a perception that simpler bikes are better for being stuck in remote places. But look, if you're not a skeptic of tech and new features, and perhaps if you're looking for a little bit more comfort, maybe your riding bias is slightly more towards adventure touring and road riding than, you know, hardcore rally riding or anything like that, then this is going to offer so much more. You really just get a few ABS modes, but there's no throttle modes, TC or anything on the Tenere. This gets the works. 5 levels of traction control. I think there's 4 riding modes and a user configurable mode. So you've got sport, road, rain, which really dulls things down, gravel, which allows a little more slip on the ABS, and then yeah, the user mode in which you can dial in TC, ABS, engine braking, and the power mode as well, of course. But also, you know, there's the option of an up and down quick shifter. That is an accessory, but still nice to have the option. There's phone connectivity, there's self-cancelling indicators, there's LED lighting all around, there's the emergency brake feature. When you hit the brakes hard, it'll flash the tail light, which when you're doing big group rides like this, you do occasionally find that useful. And so whilst the Africa Twin is pretty similarly spec'd on that front, and has a few other options like DCT and maybe a few more settings and that sort of thing, again, for the price, you don't really feel like you're missing out very much. So we're taking on the little off-road section here. As you can see, it is a little bit on the wet side today, and we're on road tires, so let's just see how we go. But yeah, let's have a little think about the Africa Twin. I mean, the big thing for me with the Africa Twin is that extra, what is it, 350cc of displacement that you've got, and they haven't really tuned that engine for you know, top end horsepower, but it does get quite a lot more grunt and torquiness, and that's really where it excels. Definitely the bike to go for if you want that more grunty, growly feel to it. And it just has so much guts, which is what I really love about that engine. I think it's sort of better than the spec sheet suggests. When you compare it to GS's and Multi V4s and KTM 1290s and the Tiger 1200 and all those big 1200cc plus adventure bikes, you know, it doesn't sound like a great deal of power. It's sort of 50, 60 horsepower down sometimes, but generally I find it to be enough for quick road riding, plenty of grunt for off-roading, enough power I think for motorway work, and you know, even with luggage and 2-up because of that, yeah, richness in the mid-range. So certainly one to think about if you are going to load the bike up fully. I think also if you're looking at the specs, like, it's a bike that has more off-road capability. It was designed more so as an off-roader, especially that base model. It sits a little bit taller, you got more clearance, there's more accessories that are sort of targeted towards off-road riding, and you'll see just how capable they are at the Adventure Centre. Not only in your own hands, but also some of the better riders and instructors there who can really show you what it can do. And yeah, so if you're going to do reasonable mileage off-road, then it's certainly the one to look at. And I think also just the extra space and presence that it has might be a bit more suited to certain riders. If you're on the bigger side, feels like it has more space, you'll probably find it a bit more comfortable. And you've got the wind protection as well from the tank, which seems to flare out a little bit more. I'm not sure if it's actually that much bigger in terms of capacity. This is 16.9 litres in the tank, whereas the Africa Twin, I think the base model might be touching 20, and you've got a bit more than that in the Adventure Sports. But certainly you feel a lot more cocooned on that bike, and especially if you opt for the Adventure Sports, which is a bit more let's say touring focused, adventure touring focused. There's a big step up in price though to that bike, so I wouldn't really expect that many people to be looking at the Adventure Sports and the Transalp. I don't think they're as comparable, but yeah, it's the base model where they're much closer in price point and feature sets. Generally, I would say as well, I do feel like the Africa Twin perhaps edges it on kind of looks and image. Ship me, this is a bit slippy. One of the downsides of this bike is the front headlight. It looks a bit CB500X, and of course to hit that price point they've got to make some concessions in terms of like the premiumness of the fit and finish and design. But yeah, I do sort of wish they'd given it the full Africa Twin dual headlights and all that good stuff, which I think really is like a distinctive and cool look for a bike. Sort of harks back to the original, a little reference, but with the DRLs it makes it look super kind of modern, quite aggressive. Sort of got a bit of a stare to it, and so I do get why someone might prefer the looks on that one. So yeah, that's my summary of the key differences between the two. It just has more presence, both in the sort of stance and stature and the engine, and then also the looks as well. But at $3,000 it's quite a significant price difference, and so I think if you've got a strict budget of, you know, like 10 grand, then this is still a great shout. Absolutely brilliant. We're not really kind of caning it off-road today. It's a little bit damp, and like I say, these are road tires. They're Metzler Karoo streets, so they're okay. So we're doing about 5 or 10 miles, I think, and then back on the road. And I think they're trying to position this bike as such. It'll do this stuff, no problems, but perhaps slightly cautious to sort of tout it as like a thoroughbred off-roader, because number one, they don't want to eat up those Africa Twin sales, but also it's going to be hard to ever beat the reputation of the Tenere 700, and it is super good off-road, that bike. So perhaps it is a wise choice not to go fully toe-to-toe with it on that front, and just position this as a bit more of a capable and comfortable and feature-laden road bike with a little bit of off-road capability, probably more than a little bit in the right hands. For me, it feels perfectly good, really manageable, easy to get on with, quite a nice balance really of substantial but not too difficult to manage. But yeah, absolutely, the hardcore off-roaders certainly, I reckon, would be better off with the Africa Twin. Anyway, I hope you're all well. Enjoyed this little spin out in Portugal. Hopefully the weather will clear up this afternoon for filming my review for the main channel, which of course you'll be able to find over on Motobob. We'll go a little bit into more detail specifically on this bike as opposed to a comparison with the Africa Twin. Hope everyone's well. I believe it's snowing back in the UK, so my apologies for you having to hear me complain about it being ever so slightly damp. But yeah, I hope you're all well. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you soon.